We've been doing this here for about, we're pushing 25 years. And I've got a BS in fisheries from Auburn University, and so has Barry. And we both went to work for the Alabama Fish and Game and Fisheries section. Almost all the graduates in fisheries would either go in to work for a state or federal agency, or they'd go to work for catfish farmers. There were really no private sport fish hatcheries in the Southeast, not just in Alabama, but I'm talking about Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, and Florida. So we just felt there was a niche for that. We felt like there was an opportunity, and we were dumb enough at 40 years old to jump out there and try it. So we're still hanging in. We enjoy it. A lot of long hours. We always say we never seen a fish farmer driving a Mercedes. We're still looking for the first one. But we enjoy it. We've met a lot of nice people, a lot of interesting people. We've got to see a lot of nice things. So there's a lot of compensation out there other than financial. And we've developed a lot of friendships, and you know, we're going, retirement is, I don't think 65, we're going to retire. We're just going to keep chugging along as we can do it. Barry, my partner, and I have both worked with largemouth bass probably for 40 years apiece. Between us, we've got about 80 years experience working with sport fish management. And we promoted Florida bass. We were probably the first large commercial sport fish hatchery in the Southeast. But there was some work done, Texas Park and Wildlife. It was one of the primary researchers, and the Fisheries Department at Auburn University has done a lot of work with Florida versus native. It was an observation that we made that these fish became very difficult to catch on artificial lures after about the second or third year. The population would be good, they'd have good sized fish in there, but difficulty in catching them. We had a couple of instances where we would even take our shocking boat out. People said they didn't have it. Go out and electrofish these lakes and turn up a very healthy bass population, bass ranging from 2 to 8, 9 pounds, but they couldn't catch them. So we had a strain of northern bass that we'd use for about 15 to 16 years, and these fish were feed. The easier they are to go on to a pelleted feed, a salmon diet is really what it is, the easier they are to catch on a hook and line. Now these bass that we had, a northern bass which grows big and grows very fast, you could catch it on a gold hook, just a gold hook, and you catch them just like that. So what we do in the spring is we'll take a male from that northern strain, put it in a pond with a female Florida. That's the only way it can cross. And that's referred to as an F1. It's not a hybrid because you're crossing two subspecies. But we had some pond stock like that, but Tom Mann that owned Mann's Company had fished them a couple of times, and he talked about how aggressive they were. And he said that the average landowner is not going to know what an F1, you need to come up with a name for it. He said, these things, man, these things are like little tigers. He said, you ought to call them that. So we got with a copyright attorney, and we registered that name, Tiger Bass, and that name is specific for the cross that we have for that genetic line of northerns and our own genetic line of Floridas.
People have changed. You know, we don't have much time, and what recreational time we have, spend fishing. We don't want to spend time trying to clean these fish. And harvest is a very important part of management.
When it comes to rod and reel time, there's nothing better than walking to your favorite spot from your own back door. What you bring home, though, may make all the difference to that spot's future.
I would say that probably 95% of the problems we see are crowded bass ponds. And this goes back to too much emphasis being placed on catch and release.
The main cause is they don't want to harvest. You know, they don't want to take these things out because they're just out here to have fun. You know, it's not like when Don and I used to go fishing with our granddaddies or our daddies, you know, we kept everything we caught and we probably cleaned them and ate them. People have changed. You know, we don't have much time, and what recreational time we have, spend fishing. We don't want to spend time trying to clean these fish. And they like catching them, that's right, and they just throw them back. And that's the wrong thing to do in most situations. Harvest is a very important part of management.
You have to manage those bass just like landowners manage a deer population. It has to be a constant harvest process.
One of our old professors said one time, he said, you know, it doesn't take any skill to grow fish up to 3 years. But when you get to that point, you need some real management to keep that pond going.
We sometimes, electric fishing boat, go analyze a pond, and we look at it, and we take fish, and we'll get a length off of them and a weight off of them, and we can compare that to a program we have that gives us a condition factor for a national database. And we know that a 15-inch bass should weigh such. If it weighs a little more, it's fat. It has a condition factor that's greater than 1, 1.2. If it's skinny, it may be a 0.8 or 0.7. Now, the average landowner, if they go and they're catching a lot of fish that they say, well, they're about a pound, usually they're less than a pound. If they're fish that are 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 inches, then usually that's a crowded bass lake. You want a bass to have a good gut on it. It should be thick across the back and around before you get to the tail fin, that little area called the caudal peduncle, that should be thick. So you want fish that are short and chunky, look like little footballs. And that's indication that they've got plenty to eat. But I'd say that most landowners have crowded bass, and you know, there's a couple of ways to correct that. You have to increase the food supply to them. And the way to do that, number one, is to remove a high percent of those bass. You may start with say a 15-inch size and remove all bass that you catch under 15 inches. Some people would set that at 16 or 17.
The way to do this thing most of the time, you know, you think that if you had a 15 or 20 or 25 acre lake and it's just you and your family and friends, then it can be an overwhelming task, especially you know if you're not oriented toward keeping these things. But one of the things that we found that works really well is that if you'll organize your buddies, and in the springtime when most of the fish are caught, if you'll put on a couple of tournaments where it's not the biggest fish, but it's the most that come in, you know, and have some prizes and make it a fun thing, you can really make an impact on these things during the spring, and that's the way to do it.
By doing that, you've got more food for the fish remaining. Then if you fertilize that, keep it fertilized, that bluegill population will expand. Automatic feeders, if you feed those bluegill, thicken up, and as they thicken up again, the ovaries will expand, they'll turn out more offspring. And then one way we recommend is to go back in there and add more bluegill to it. After you've thinned the bass, go back and add more bluegill. Go back and add a 3 or 4 inch bluegill in there to it, and you've got more in there, more food. The other thing we do is we add threadfin shad in there. Those shad will spawn multiple times a year. They're a schooling, filter feeding fish that are not eating off the same plate that the bluegill are. So what you're doing is you're building that food supply back up. But it's always a constant process of removing bass.